weekend, which was almost a week ago now, because your boy was pretty sick, still getting through that. But Shakur Stevenson dominates Teofimo Lopez, wins 11 out of 12 rounds on all three scorecards, and in my opinion, puts on the best defensive performance since Floyd Mayweather, just beat Canelo Alvarez 13 years ago. So yeah. With this win, Teofimo is now, or excuse me, Shakur is now a top five pound for pound fighter, a Hall of Famer already at 28 years old, and handily wins the lineal title in his very first fight at 140 pounds. I got a chance to rewatch it a couple times. I know you rewatched it a couple times too. What did you think of the fight, Raheem?
I said this before the fight, and I need to reiterate that I had Teofimo Lopez slotted as the favorite while not my pick. The reason I thought it was important to make that point was because post fight, when Shakur Stevenson put on the performance that we all have now seen, I didn't want it to be diminished by people talking about how Teofimo wasn't a class fighter or wasn't as good as what he is. And while we are marveling at the performance of Shakur Stevenson, I think it deserves a little more credit than even what it's getting because I actually don't see the Teofimo performance as particularly poor. I thought Teo did what Teo does, and nothing Teo did was able to get the job done. That was the problem. He was bested by a fighter who was able to shut every door Teofimo was trying to walk through. Not because Teofimo didn't have a good game plan. He had the game plan that I expected him to go in with. Not because he wasn't fast or he didn't have power anymore, like his father said in the corner, or because he was gassed or even distracted. He fought his best fight. He showed up and fought to the level of the fight as well. He didn't come in with some shit performance. It just was what they always say, levels to this. And it is true that Shakur was on another level, but fought the best Teofimo you're going to get. Yes, Teofimo's corner and his father, which I'm sure we'll get into, was incredibly poor. But it was the exact same corner he always gets out of his father. It wasn't like his father was some marvelous wizard, mastermind, soothsayer of incredible wisdom in between rounds up until Saturday night. No, this is what you get. This is what he always got. And Teo fought to, I think, the level that Teo can fight. That's a good Teofimo Lopez fighting to his ability. And his ability at its best wasn't nearly good enough. That should be part of the conversation. It's not that you came in against a Teo that wasn't on his game. It's that there are levels to this, and now we know what level Shakur is on.
Yeah, he tried to come forward out the gates, ate a jab after missing his first few shots. He tried to let Shakur come to him and do what he does best, and that's counterpunch, and that didn't work either. So, yeah, he's 28 years old and in his physical prime. His dad, I think the one time Teo Sr. Definitely got the credit and deserved, I think he maybe won Trainer of the Year that year, was the Lomachenko fight, where he called his shot for years and along with Joey Gamache, had Teofimo ready for that particular style matchup, and that was by far Teo Sr.'s finest hour. But ever since then, even the Josh Taylor win and stuff like that, I don't think Teofimo Sr. has been a good trainer really and has impressed anybody. And I don't know if Teofimo Jr. has really gotten any better since the Lomachenko fight. It was just the Josh Taylor fight. Josh was starting; it was starting to be hard for him to make weight. He had that tough fight with Jack Catterall that could have went either way, and Teo had a hell of a performance. So, yeah, I think you're absolutely right about that. His father's been the same trainer basically the whole time, sans the Lomachenko matchup. Looks like maybe some lifestyle stuff has gotten the better of him, which Wally Moses touched on in the other corner. And while I got to give credit to Wally Moses, he's built Shakur from scratch. His other fighter, Zaquin Moses, shares his last name from scratch. He's been a top flight amateur coach and now is a top flight professional coach, been one. And he called his shot in this fight the way Teofimo Sr. called Teofimo Jr.'s shot against Lomachenko. He called this the whole way through what was going to happen, was the most vocal we've ever seen him. and him and his fighter Shakur, they backed it completely up. But yeah, go ahead.
I jump in on the trainer thing,
Yeah.
just to address what you said. I don't think calling your shot for your fighter to win a fight that he even may be an underdog in, and then being found out to be correct, really should make you trainer of the year. It means that you see something in your fighter that he's able to do, and then you go in there and he actually does it, and great. But what is difficult, what should make you trainer of the year, is when your fighter is losing. If something had happened in the Lopez corner that changed the tide of the fight somewhere past the first 3 rounds, which is where I realized this fight was over after 3. If Lopez had been able to tell his son something in the corner that changed the direction of this fight or got his son a victory somehow, then that is what makes you trainer of the year. It's when you go in there and the game plan doesn't go according to design, and you have to make an adjustment, and you have to get your fighter to do something that he otherwise hasn't proven that he's able to do, or he can make something happen that we don't see coming. That is what trainer of the year should be. That is where you get credit in the corner. If you know your fighter has this ability and you're right about it, and then it just all goes to plan, well, yeah, great, you celebrate the victory, but that isn't difficult. That's not difficulty final boss level for a trainer. What we saw Teofimo going through in the corner was part and parcel of what he always gets in the corner, and it was the moment that Lopez Sr. could have stepped up and proven that in that moment he had something, that he had the ability to reach his son and turn his son into something else that he wasn't at the moment, that made him successful in subsequent rounds. Teofimo's father did not have that. There wasn't that pivot. He didn't say anything that would bring that out of Teofimo, and so he failed to be that exceptional trainer. However, it is not on him that Teofimo lost that fight, because that's what Teofimo is accustomed to. And if Teofimo wants to make a change in his corner and become accustomed to something else going forward, then fine, and maybe something else will work better for him. But he came in the best Teo that you're going to see, with the corner he's accustomed to, getting what he always gets there, and wasn't able to get the job done. That's not on Senior. Yes, he deserves criticism, but not because of what he did in the corner, just because of what he's not capable of doing in the corner. And that criticism just means he's not exceptional. He can't probably take Teofimo to the next level, and the next level, if that means a rematch somehow with Shakur, then yeah, you need a next level trainer to win that fight. But I think the Teo that we saw Saturday night still beats most guys at 140. I'd still, if he had that performance, if he was that prepared the exact same way, that performance, I think beats most guys at 140. Still, just not Shakur Stevenson.
Well, yeah, his flaws were brutally on display, that Shakur exposed in this fight. They had been on display against other fighters like Sandor Martin and Jermaine Ortiz, but they couldn't exploit it to the level that Shakur Stevenson did. I mean, he had him lunging for right hands so bad, and while doing it by just taking a step back or a half step back and then resetting his position, he did that beautifully in this fight. He made him reach and lunge without even really having to turn him or move that far out of range all night, and went forward plenty of the fight and made Teofimo have to fight southpaw, which is something he doesn't actually do. It was just he would get so out of position missing a right hand that he would have to say, all right, I'm just going to have to stay in the southpaw stance sometimes because I can't get back on defense in time. But yeah, his dad, this was the worst performance in the corner I've seen in a fight of this magnitude, maybe ever, to just keep it real. Yeah.
But is it not typical for that corner from that trainer?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So what makes this worse than any other corner that Teofimo has gotten in the past? Just the spotlight, just how much we paid attention to it because he was getting dominated. But that same corner was there when he was dominating other fighters. When he put that resume together, that was better than Shakur's. The difference was Shakur Stevenson, and he fought the best Teo you're going to get That's all I'm saying. I don't want this to be diminished as if T.O. was not served by his corner, or he wasn't prepared with the right game plan, or he wasn't didn't have the power.
No, I
He
think he
brought
could have
everything
had.
that he could bring at its best, and it just looked poor because Shakur was so much better.
Yeah, I think you could have had Eddie Futch, Emmanuel Stewart, Customato, and Angelo Dundee taking turns in between corners, and he was in between rounds, and it still wouldn't have really changed anything, in this fight. Shakur is just a better fighter than Teofimo Lopez. There's no question about that, based on everything we saw. But to get into the technical stuff, I mean, I made sure to try to take every little note I could of what it was that Shakur pulled off there. What did you like about some of the technical aspects of what Shakur did, and then I'll get into some of the notes I took on a rewatch.
I'm gonna pass the ball back to you because I do have some notes about what I was impressed by, and I will give you one because I far in a way am here to hear your technical breakdown of the fight. It is unmatched across the entire landscape of boxing. So it seems cart before the horse for me to go first on that. I will say this one thing though, that in the eighth round, the only round that Teofimo won, I believe that that was Shakur Stevenson's offense minded approach as a defensive minded fighter. What I mean by that is he was opening the door to Tio to get aggressive. He didn't lose the round because Tio was figuring something out. He was trying to set a trap so that he could accomplish the knockout. A lot of criticism I feel that's coming Shakur's way about not being aggressive enough or not going after the knockout. This is how he goes after the knockout. He depresses his own offense, draws the fighter in, and then with the fighter having some confidence, winning a round, maybe getting comfortable, taking some chances, then goes for the knockout that way. What he's not going to do is press the action, open himself up to being vulnerable, and give his opponent an opportunity to counter that vulnerability and potentially land shots that he doesn't want to take. He's not the guy who's going to take one to give two. He's the guy who's going to let you feel like you can land one, still be defensive, but keep the door open for your offense, give you just enough to maybe think that you're able now to take a chance and then punish you for that chance. That's as close as you're going to get to an offensive knockout-minded Shakur Stevenson. To me, that was the compromise he made. That was him saying, okay, I'm going to take a chance that I don't have to take, which is to let Tio get off a little offense or at least feel some confidence so that maybe I can walk him on to something. That's as good as it's, I think, ever going to get from Shakur Stevenson as far as chasing a knockout. That's what it looks like when it comes from him, getting the offense out of his opponent just so he can set a trap to take advantage of the vulnerabilities that that offense brings.
Well, I'll get into that later in the discussion about his offensive output and all that. But I first wanted to give him all his credit on all the great technical things he executed last Saturday. So, Emmanuel Stewart and Joe Lewis said that the secret of a great fighter is balance. And you saw the greater fighter in Shakur Stevenson have much better balance with his base and everything he did against Teofimo Lopez, who fights off of that athleticism that Shakur said. Well, Shakur had a quote before the fight. He said, "There's too many, it's a mismatch. Tio has too many holes in his games, and I'm going to expose it." And that's exactly what he did. He exposed a guy who fights off athleticism. Heading in, it was like maybe Teofimo could be the Roy Jones to his Bernard Hopkins, James Toney. But the morning of the fight, Shakur shared something on Instagram of brother Nazim Richardson talking about how at some point that stuff's going to slow down. And but he fought a guy at 28 years old. I mean, Nazim was saying this about Roy probably after Bernard rematched him when all of Roy's gifts left. But the point still being, at some point, you're going to have to make sure, did you really learn how to catch punches? Did you really learn how to do every little technical, fundamental thing in the sport of boxing? And if you don't, it's going to catch up with you. And that's where Shakur disciplined Teofimo Lopez in this fight. And as far as the athleticism goes, Teofimo didn't look like the faster, more athletic fighter necessarily in this fight. And fighters like Bruce Carrington and Angelo Leo and other ones I spoke to, who almost all fighters heading into this fight picked Shakur Stevenson and felt they all talked to me about his point A to point B punches. Yeah, Teofimo's twitchy and he's all this, but Shakur may actually still be the faster guy because of how precise and pinpoint the way he throws his punches from point A to point B. Sergio Mora on the broadcast talking about how he doesn't telegraph anything. And that was, key in this fight. That was big in this fight. But let me get into just some of the things he did. Again, he forced Teo to fight as a southpaw sometimes, not by his own choosing, not like Dominanace or Terrence Crawford, but because of how bad he made him fall out of position. He took every punch away from him, the jab, the right hand, and the left hook. And Teo found the body later on in spots, but nothing too effective or consistent. This was you reach, I teach, where every time Teofimo tried to reach for something, he got countered with a jab or fell well short out of position. And then speaking of the jab, we always hear how that's the most important punch in boxing. That was the punch that won him the fight more than any other punch. And I think almost 2/3 of his connects were off the jab. But he had the step back jab. He timed the jab coming forward with the parry jab, which out of the southpaw stance is a little bit different because when you parry the jab, orthodox versus orthodox, you parry it with the opposite hand and shoot with your jab hand, with your lead hand. He was a southpaw, so he just catch it and then boom, hit him like that. And yeah, so he did. That's how he did it. So he did every jab there was. The step back jab. He came forward behind his jab when he wanted to. He parried and came back with his jab. His resets, the way he would take a little small step out and then reset his own kind of pressure on the front foot was impeccable. His sense of distance that everybody has talked about is one of his true gifts. Probably the best sense of distance in boxing right now, knowing his sense of distance and great timing, of course, to go with the speed. Not only was he faster, he had better timing. He controlled the center of the ring without even having to turn Teofimo really that often, except for the occasional sharp pivot. But really, he didn't. Usually, when you talk about controlling the center of the ring as a great technical boxer and defensive fighter, you're turning your opponent, turning him, and he didn't even have to do that. He has his own blend, his own way of controlling the center of the ring with really efficient steps. And his sense of distance was so good, he didn't even have to bob and weave a whole lot or get underneath shots. And I remember Derek James kind of underrating, and what I thought at the time, underrating head movement and saying, a lot of that head movement, you don't need it if you can control the other fighter at the end of your jab and know your distance and keep them like that. And I thought Shakur Stevenson executed what he was talking about, at a higher level than, Spence was even able to ever do, and illustrated Derek's point good. And another guy I remember saying that while he was beating somebody up in sparring, trying to educate Gervonta Davis, was Floyd Mayweather. And Floyd was explaining, because the guy was trying to get in on Floyd Mayweather, the sparring partner, he was getting low, trying to do the Mike Tyson or just what could get the hands up and get low. And Floyd would be making fun of him, like, I don't got to do all that. Bink! And then just keep him on the end of the jab. And that's what Shakur was able to. He didn't even have to go to the shoulder roll really that often. Like, the shoulder roll was just there to take away some of the body shots and take a step out and catch that down below. And Andre Ward always talks about, to young fighters, don't over rely on the shoulder roll. Don't go to it too early until you get control of the fight. He fought a lot of the fight right here, not even needing some of those special effects. That's how fundamentally sound he is without the shoulder roll, without all of that stuff. And he just, the way I'll let you go into say, and then the way he closed off so many punching lanes with just his positioning and how he positioned his gloves in different ways. It's stuff that young fighters are for sure going to be studying for years to come for their technical prowess.
All of that is an incredibly detailed breakdown of a fight that was won with the 1-2. I feel like if we're gonna boil it down to the most simple expression of boxing finesse and fundamentals, it was the 1-2 offense. And anything created off of that really was far and few between. Like what Shakur Stevenson did was just beat Tio to the punch with the jab, punish him when he leaped in with the right hand, go back to the jab, control the distance within centimeters as if they were tethered together by a pole on their waist and that Tio couldn't get too far away or couldn't get too close. Every time he got in a range, he got touched. Tio couldn't get around it, couldn't find a way in without getting hit, and then couldn't even create offense because he could never get started. And all of that was done essentially with the 1-2, which is why when those like myself might call this a master class or a masterful performance, you were met with criticism from some corners because it was such a simple performance and it wasn't necessarily creative or using nearly all the tools that Shakur might have had at his disposal that could have potentially got us a knockout. But he didn't need those tools to absolutely dominate Teofimo Lopez. And for me, what I love about boxing is minimalism. Some people love all of the available tools. You want to see every punch combination. You want to see a knockout being pressed for. You want to see all the things. I like boxing more than MMA because there's less going on. There are less weapons. You have to be more minimalist and makes it, to me, more of a science the less you use and the less you have to do. And that is what was on display. And it wasn't a completely defensive performance from Shakur, so I didn't find it boring. I did find him finding his offense just a simple offense that was simply good enough. And I was entertained by that. I was impressed by how simple it was, how effective it was, how consistent it was, and I enjoyed watching him execute it. And I kept waiting to see if Tio could come up with something to make Shakur be creative, to change which I knew Shakur would be able to have other things if he was forced to do other things. And for me, that was the chess match. Could Tio force him to do anything else? And the answer was no. For me, that was entertaining. I was entertained.
No, he was completely shut down and shut out. And but when you said earlier you felt maybe things were getting overlooked, I don't think so. I think he shut him out, but he won 10-0. Okay, he didn't, as opposed to 41-0 or 34-0. If we're going to compare it to another sport, or people, I think my guy Andreas Hale, I saw a headline he wrote in for ESPN. Shout out to Andreas, saying he pitched a shutout in the World Series, which is fair, but in boxing, you are the offense and the defense. And when Max Kellerman was saying, hang it in the Louvre, that was prime Mayweather, that was prime Whitaker, things like that. Todd Grisham on the call is saying it is even better than Terrence Crawford. And, I don't know about all that. I think it was a masterclass. It's a brilliant performance. I could get into even more notes of all the great technical things he did execute. And he is obviously a great fighter. But I think a more complete masterpiece, like, okay, Floyd could have just beaten Canelo with the 1-2. Basically, in the same kind of dominant fashion, Hopkins probably could have just beaten Trinidad with the 1-2. But to name some performances to me that were more complete masterpieces, truly worthy of that level of praise, Hopkins, Trinidad, Crawford, Spence, Andre Ward against Sergey Kovalev in the rematch, and Chad Dawson, Inoue against Fulton, Mayweather against Corrales, and even in two fights where necessarily the show wasn't finished, the job wasn't done inside of 12 rounds, Mayweather and Crawford against Canelo, who both well into their 30s threw over 500 punches against a Canelo who is a better defensive fighter than Teofimo Lopez, who doesn't get out of position as often as Teofimo Lopez. And so I don't know. I think that's some of my pushback on it. And in our boxing bubble, um, I scoff at people being like, "Oh, well, you just don't understand." Like they basically the argument then is you just don't understand what you're looking at, or you're hating on Shakur and all that. That's why you got people like Shannon Sharp and Steven Jackson who aren't in that boxing bubble, who don't understand but boxing as well as maybe people like me and you in the audience who watch it week in and week out and love the sport at the level we do. But that's why they both conceded, hey, you're a great fighter. You definitely won. But they didn't particularly love watching it either. And I can understand that because in this fight, you had one fighter, Teofimo Lopez, so outclassed he couldn't do anything effective, and another fighter, Shakur Stevenson, who was so in control with his positioning and his technical brilliance over the other fighter that he didn't take advantage of those advantages in a super prolific way. Half the time you got Teofimo out of position so bad, so open for counter punches, and you didn't always do it. He threw 372 punches in this fight and averaged 5 power shots landed around. Again, Mayweather and Crawford, well into their 30s, not at 28 years old, when they were both still scoring stoppages all the time, routinely, they threw over 500 punches against Canelo Alvarez. So I look at those as more complete performances. It's a masterclass. It was a brilliant performance. He's easily top five, pound for pound. If you think he's top three, that's fine. And by the way, the people saying this and that about what Shannon Sharp said, again, Shannon conceded he's a great fighter. And Keyshawn Davis and Bruce Carrington went on his show the next day. So he's giving the sport mainstream coverage. Those two guys are close with Shakur. Well, Keyshawn, of course, is close with Shakur. They both got knockouts on the same card. I got to be honest, there's even people going to be in the comments saying, oh, you're trying to take away from a great black fighter. Almost every other performance I named happened by other great black fighters who executed at a higher level and put together more complete masterpieces if we're going to judge it as a masterpiece. Even Bruce Carrington and Keyshawn Davis on the same card finished the job. Now, it's a compliment to Shakur that I think he could have stepped it up more. Tim Bradley said the same in so many words. And Shakur wound up tweeting it out, saying he appreciated Tim's analysis and thought he could have done it as well. I think he was more entertaining than Josh Kelly, who threw less punches than he did, who moved a lot more than he did, who conned his way through the second half of a fight, but still won his fight. So credit to him on the level he operated at to win a title. And obviously, we give him massive credit to Shakur Stevenson too. And Keyshawn Davis and Bruce Carrington did not fight fighters at the caliber of a Teofimo Lopez. But Shakur, early in the fight, was saying, I'm going to stop him. His grandfather, Wally Moses, said after the first or second round, it's paramount that we step up the pace. 372 punches is not stepping up the pace. And I get a little bit more animated talking about this because my job sometimes is to say what other people aren't saying. And so if Max Kellerman, the biggest voice in boxing, is saying, hang it in the Louvre, if the commentators on DAZN are espousing it as a complete masterpiece all the time, which it was to a large degree, and are saying he may be better than Terrence Crawford, then I think it's only right that I mention what the mainstream boxing media isn't mentioning, because they can get lost in their own bubble too, and they just want to calculate something like what Shannon Sharp is. Well, he doesn't know shit about boxing, and he somewhat doesn't. He mentioned that Sugar Ray Leonard at these weights got knockouts. Sugar Ray Leonard never fought at 140 pounds, okay? So, or Thomas Hearns, or some of the other guys he mentioned. But the spirit of what he's saying holds some merit. He's saying the guys he's being compared to on that level at this stage in their career stepped it up more offensively. And the sport of boxing is hit and don't get hit, but don't forget the hit part. And there's also a skill to being first and last. If you can initiate your offense, swim without getting wet, finish up a counter. Look, I'm not saying he needed to get a stoppage. At the end of the day, he outclassed another kid who's in his prime, who's going to be in the Hall of Fame too. So salute to him. But to compare it to some of those other performances, it wasn't as complete as those. And I think his positioning and his skills and his precision are such that he could fight better going forward, as good as he fought.
Could he have created the kind of offense you're talking about without opening himself up to more vulnerability
It's
and
risky.
giving Teofimo some options offensively
Mm-hmm.
to damage Shakur?
It's risky because even rewatching the fight, Teofimo still had his reflexes and still had his power late in the fight. So, and Teofimo, what he's best at is his counterpunching. So if you get a little zealous there and give him counterpunching opportunities, yeah, there's a chance. There's a small. But I think Shakur was good enough to see what would be coming back and be first and last and catch
I
what's
think
coming back and step on the gas a little bit like he said he was going to in the corner, like his grandfather wanted him to in the corner.
Yeah, but I think what you initially said is right. It's risky.
It is.
And what you're saying isn't guaranteed that he would be able to do that, or necessarily that if Teofimo caught him with a good shot, got some confidence, maybe rocked him. He's still, this first fight at 140, he certainly filled out the weight. The class didn't look small or gone or anything like that. No question. He, looked on weight. Shakur, I'm talking about. But it's still a new weight class for him. Teo still does have a punch, and he's dominating him, busting his eye up, shutting his offense down, getting Shakur's offense off. Why take that level of vulnerability? Why take that risk when fighting for a world title at your first time at the weight division against a class fighter like Teo, who does still have gas in the tank late, who's still trying to win, who's still in and out, just isn't getting anything off, and now you're just gonna make yourself vulnerable so fucking Shannon Sharp can be entertained? No, man. Fuck no, absolutely not. And on top of that, if we're gonna go with the baseball analogy of the no-hitter, I believe that what we saw here was a pitcher who actually went after a batter instead of walking him. Now, I know this is going to be a long analogy for those who don't really understand baseball or pitching, but you could pitch around the sluggers if you're pitching a no-hitter, let them walk to the base, and then go after the guy after them who doesn't have much of a bat, and then continue to get strikeouts or double plays, and you avoid the heavy hitters. I think in the eighth round, which is all you're really going to get out of Shakur in a performance like that, with the stakes as high as they are, with the fighter as good as Teofimo, he pitched to him in the eighth round. He, instead of walking him or staying defensive and taking the round off and then just dominating and going forward, he tried to bait him in, and this is what my analogy is with him going after a batter as a pitcher, baited him into creating some offense, gave him a chance to do something, but Shakur not making himself vulnerable. However, shutting his own offense down so that Teo would get some aggressive offense. So again, I know that this baseball analogy is a little long in the tooth for those who don't know baseball, but you do have the Yankees sign right behind you. Mm-hmm. He threw strikes in that eighth round. He just didn't throw any pitches for Teofimo to hit. And if you understand baseball, you understand that analogy. Teofimo is a slugger who could have knocked a home run if you throw him a pitch to hit, but you can also strike him out if you throw pitches in the strike zone and give him an opportunity to chase balls. And no diddy. But Teofimo was chasing balls in the eighth round, won the eighth round, and that, I believe, was Shakur's moment where he thought maybe in the ninth round, Teo would take some chances, get out over his skis, leave one of those punches out there too long, get too aggressive, stay in the pocket too late, and he could hit him with something to knock him out. Because at that point, his eyes busted, he's getting frustrated, his corner is clearly not helping him make any kind of pivots, and he was potentially vulnerable to the knockout. And for Shakur, that's as good as you're going to get as far as him just opening himself up to being vulnerable for no reason. And yes, Shannon Sharp, you were allowed to be entertained by what you're entertained by and to say that you liked it or you didn't like it. But because you didn't like it doesn't mean it wasn't fucking good. And if you weren't entertained by it, I would be one of those people who say it's probably because you're not educated enough to know what you're looking at, because I like good pitching. And a lot of people are not entertained by a baseball game with good pitching.
No, but see,
People want to see home runs. How come you don't pitch to the slugger? How come you walk my favorite batter all the time? Why don't you give him a chance to hit the ball? If you're pitching a no-hitter, you pitch around the sluggers because you can. And it wasn't boring. It wasn't, I know what a boring fight is when there is no offense coming back and you're just popping the jab, not even with no intention on it. Those punches had mustard on them.
hmm
Those punches had bad intention. He's not apparently a heavy enough handed fighter in this instance to knock Teofimo out, but he hit him enough times, hit him with some sharp punches, cut his face up, and battered him for 12 rounds, or at least 11 out of 12. In the one round he didn't do it. I thought he was trying to set a trap. I don't know what else you want from the guy.
How about a combination? Did he throw one combination in this fight?
I enjoyed
What
the execution of the 1-2. And no, I don't know if he, I mean, come on, maybe a couple, but not enough to make an impression on you. However, I mean, he was throwing razors, slicing
Oh yeah,
the eye up, and then the jab so quick, pop, 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 which had bad intentions on it. To get a combination off, I mean, yeah, you'd have to stay in the pocket a little longer, maybe throw a inside, a hook or an uppercut. And both of those punches make you vulnerable to a counter punch, which Teofimo still has in his bag.
but
So
that's skill
it's up
to
to
get
Teo
off
to
a
force him
combination.
to do that.
But that's skill. Like we're talking about skill, skill, skill. That's skill to get off a combination. Oscar De La Hoya, Sugar Ray Leonard, Muhammad Ali, Sugar Ray Robinson, they got off plenty of combinations where the other guy couldn't get something back off. That's a skill set in and of itself. And if you weren't able to display that skill in your masterpiece, then it's not as a complete as masterpiece as others. And when you two things you said about Shannon, you said if you don't think that's good, he didn't say it was good. He said it was great. He acknowledged that this guy is a great fighter. And when you go, well, then if it's not to you, it's because maybe you don't know what you're looking at. And I know what I'm looking at, and I'm articulating a lot of the same stuff he said. I could go down a whole list of notes of every technical, brilliant thing he did in the fight. And that's what I mean. In this boxing bubble, we always gotta try to, use the Roger Mayweather quote. And by the way, for those watching right now, I knew the real Roger Mayweather. Raheem interviewed him, and I'm in the background of a Raheem interview with Roger Mayweather. I did the famous Eddie Murphy 24/7 test. And it was around when I knew who Charlie Burley was that Roger Mayweather said, you know boxing. So before you get in my fucking comments and do this stupid ass, you don't know about shit about boxing bullshit, the guy who made that phrase says, you know boxing, quote, end quote. So this is where my pushback comes from is this is why we had a podcast at the start of the year talking about boxing stands. Their ears are bleeding right now. Ah, you're hating on Shakur. You don't know shit about boxing. No. There were more complete performances where the counterpunching was executed better. The offense was executed better. There was. And I wouldn't even be saying this if everybody was trying to make it into that when it wasn't quite. It was brilliant. It was a masterclass. It was a performance that the kids in the USA boxing amateurs and abroad around the world will be watching and studying to take key elements from. Okay? He is, for the fifth time, I will say this. He's top 5, maybe top 3, pound for pound. He's a Hall of Famer at 28 and all of that. But I told you before we got on, I feel like I'm going to be a heretic by pointing out some of this stuff. Like you're a heretic for pointing out, hey man, it wasn't a particularly good fight. And yes, a large reason of that is because how much he neutralized and shut down
That's a good fight to me, Sean. That's a good fight. He wasn't on the back foot. He was on the front foot. He was offensive. Yes. And when I say what Shannon said, maybe I should have said it for Shannon, it wasn't good enough for him to want to buy another ticket or pay-per-view to a Shakur fight. And maybe that's because him, doesn't appreciate what he's looking at. Doesn't not that he's dumb or he's super casual, but he doesn't like I say again with this analogy, pitching, good pitching. I mean, strong, aggressive pitching. He doesn't. His bar is too fucking low. He's low hanging fruit. That's not the reason that you're criticizing. It's not the same what Shannon is saying. Shannon is really just mildly entertained. He needs something very simple, even more simple than the 1-2 he needs to see a knockdown. If Shakur got with that exact same performance, if in the 10th round Teofimo goes down, if then in the 12th round he's followed up and Shakur knocks him out, same punches, everything, but just one of those punches instead of Teofimo being able to take it, goes down, gets the knockout. I guarantee you, Shannon Sharpe is more than satisfied. He's happy with that. He's outcome seeking. And if he doesn't get the outcome, he doesn't get what he's coming for in that sense, then he thinks that this isn't good enough. And what you're saying is not what he's saying. And what you're saying makes sense. You're saying push the gas. Do more because you can. Throw combinations because they're there to be thrown and you can land them. And yes, maybe it's risky. There's a little bit of more vulnerability in it. But because you are so superior in this night, that the amount of risk is worth the reward. I understand that. And if you were able to get in his ear like his corner was asking for, to be fair, they wanted the same. I get that. Mm-hmm. It's a different fight, though, than what he was fighting. And I think Shakur, his mentality about boxing, which I don't necessarily criticize, if he's fighting off the front foot, executing, being offensive-minded, busting the fighter up, cutting him, dominating him, shutting down his offense, he's not about to take a single shot or make a risky choice just so that he can get off an extra 2 punches in a combination. He's going to stick to what is working and force you to force him to do something else. And that mental game, that chess match, I enjoy. Some might not.
Well, I mean, I'm pretty sure Shannon enjoyed Canelo Crawford, and there was no knockdown, no knockout there. There was no end outcome he needed to see to enjoy it. And every time Bud threw combinations in the pocket, a lot of the times early in those rounds in the second half of the fight, that was taking a chance. He's in the pocket with Canelo Alvarez, and Canelo's getting off body shots at times, some of his best work, and the combinations are overwhelming Canelo Alvarez. That's why that's a more impressive performance. But let Todd Grisham of DAZN tell it, and it's even better than Terrence Crawford. Let Max Kellerman tell it, and hey, that's okay. All I'm pushing back against a little bit.
Okay, but let me take you down the road on that one. Yeah. The reason, and I don't know what Shannon said about Terrence and Canelo, to be honest and be fair, but let's just assume that I do know, and that what you're saying is correct.
And Shannon, we're using Shannon as a figure to represent people outside of this shrinking boxing bubble that we are in.
We're using Shannon to represent everybody who's not Sharpe. So what you saw in the reaction of someone like Shannon, who was excited about a Terrence Crawford win over Canelo without a knockdown, without a knockout, was because it was framed as Terrence Crawford doing the impossible. So in that case, winning was enough. He had been predisposed to say to himself that if Terrence is able to be successful, then that is what I've come to see. That is the payoff that I'm here to get. And that wasn't true for Shakur Stevenson, which is why at the open of this conversation and past pods that we've done, I keep saying that Teofimo should have been the favorite on paper, so that in exactly this argument, I could say that yes, that is enough, because we're now seeing Shakur for the first time demonstrate at a level that he haven't seen him at before, winning a world championship in a weight class for his first time in that weight class against a champion who came with his best A game, and that should be appreciated the same as you see the appreciation for Terrence Crawford beating Canelo. I'm not saying that what Shakur what it did should be framed as doing the impossible, going up the weight classes. I get all that, but he was doing something that we had never seen him done before, wasn't sure that he could do, had the potential to do. We expected that maybe he could, but he hadn't yet, and he was facing a guy who had a better resume, who was champion at the weight, and came with his A game, and you should appreciate that even without a knockout, that performance is on par with a great performance like a Terrence Crawford over a Canelo. And if you don't give Teofimo the respect that he deserves going in, and admit that he came in with his A game and his usual corner and all that, then you won't see the fight in the same dynamic.
I think you're right. The underdog narrative definitely lends all to that. You're right. But also, what lends to it is Terrence Crawford threw 150 more punches, wearing 28 more pounds of weight at 10 years older age. I think that also has something to do with it. I think also throwing a dozen or so combinations in the second half of the fight and exchanging with Canelo and hurting him at the final bell. I also think all of that made someone a little bit more taken by what they saw in that performance by a Terrence Crawford than necessarily what they saw by a Shakur Stevenson. So, but all that said,
I will give you Terrence Crawford's performance against Canelo was better than Shakur's performance against Teofimo Lopez, and it should be. Terrence retired after that fight because he's had that much experience, that accomplished in boxing. He's the mentor of Shakur Stevenson, and this was Shakur Stevenson's first time stepping up in class. So yeah, it should be. You know better than me which was the first time that Terrence Crawford stepped up. We might call that the Gamboa fight. I don't know. He got rocked in that fight. Yes, yes. At this stage, that's what Shakur should be doing if he's on his way to being a Terrence Crawford in the sport. This is what Shannon Sharp should appreciate now, not 15 years later.
yeah, and knock Gamboa out. And, okay, yeah. Kind of like Floyd did Genaro Hernandez and Diego Corrales and Arturo Gatti and, in each of his step-up fights. But, yeah, the guys he's being, compared to. But I'll say I think for Shakur now, the pound-for-pound number one matchup, the one that I think can make him the best fighter in the world is Devin Haney at 147. And I don't know if that fight is a 2026 fight or not. I think the Conor Benn fight, I get it. It's money. Whatever on that fight, sure. Get your money. It's not a bad fight. Conor Benn is certainly not a bad fighter. But I know what you can do against a guy who fights off athleticism. And you just did that against a guy more decorated than Conor Benn and Teofimo Lopez, and you schooled him. So I think you could school Conor Benn too. I like at 140 the Richardson Hitchens or Gary Antoine Russell fight, but I don't think he'll really look their way because they're not draws. At 135, I like the Raymond Murataya fight. Styles make fights. Murataya, I think, has a style to be more competitive potentially than Teofimo. He stays on balance. He applies educated pressure. But obviously, Shakur would be a favorite in that fight. Shakur is going to be a favorite against basically anybody from 147 on down after this performance. So I think inevitably, though, the fight to decide who could be the next pound-for-pound guy would be him and Devin Haney at 147. So, and their sparring session was really good when they were either teenagers or very young men. So I hope that fight can get done at some point.
I don't want to see Shakur Stevenson at 147 yet.
No. That's why I'm like, I don't know if that's a 2026 fight.
Nah, not even against Ben. Not even against Ben.
Yeah, I don't know.
Go back down to 35. Lock up undisputed. I'd love to see the Murataya fight. Mm-hmm. Be king there. Take your time. Build your brand and your fan base. Knock these guys out if you can at a lighter weight. Gradually go up when it's natural, when it's time to fill out, and when some of the dust has settled at 40 and 47, and fight the kings instead of getting in the mire while they figure out who's king there. Like, you can do that. You can run 35 a little longer, get undisputed, let the dust settle at 40 and 47, and then go in there and knock off who's ever on the throne. I'd like to see that progression.
Yeah, and by the way, to close on that, you don't have to get a stoppage. It's not stoppage or bust or knockout or bust. That's why I brought up Mayweather and Crawford against Canelo. It's just, I want to see you execute at your highest potential level. And I think he left some food on the table. But if he was my son and I was either in his corner or watching ringside, I wouldn't want to hear none of this bullshit. I would be very happy with the 12-0, 11-1, dominating, making all this money, becoming a 2-time lineal champion, 4-time champion, 4-division champion, Um, I'd be more than satisfied with that. So, despite whatever I'm saying, and there was what Barry Jones, Teddy Atlas, they both talked about just how perfect his performance was. So, plenty to be happy about for Shakur Stevenson and his fans as well. So, at the end of the day, excellent performance.